Let's talk a little bit about image quality. Are you getting the best image quality possible? Do your prints look fantastic? What are you basing that knowledge on? Let's take a look at it. My name is Rob Skeoch, and I've been shooting black and white film for over 50 years and worked over 45 years as a professional photographer, shooting for decades for Major League Baseball and the NFL, and I've been published everywhere from Sports Illustrated to National Geographic. Maybe some of the techniques that I use will be useful to you as you learn film photography. So let's start with this image. This is by Henri Cartier-Bresson, the father of photojournalism, the great French photographer. And this is a very famous photo. Now, the first time I've seen an actual print of this was in the art gallery in Ottawa. And they had an 8x10, they had a couple of Cartier-Bressons in a room full of other people's work. And you know what they were? They were underwhelming. And this photo, famous as it is, when you look at the original, you think, wow, it's not even sharp. Now, the bike part I can see because of the blur and the shutter speed. But the image itself, it's not sharp. And for two very good reasons that Cartier-Bresson had no control over. The film of the day was not as good as it is today. And the lenses were not as good as they are today. So, although it's a famous photo, it doesn't really have great sharpness from today's standards. It doesn't take away from it being a great photo, but it's not really sharp. Now, as we look at Cartier-Bresson's work, this is early Cartier-Bresson. Later in his career, of course, he left photography and came back to it. But later in his career, modern films, modern cameras, the work was quite a bit better. But this shot as well, from 1932. Now, it looks quite a bit sharper than the previous one. So I don't know, maybe there's a different film using or different optics, whatever it is. But these early shots, they're great, but they're not exceedingly amazing quality, which is what we're talking about. So what do you base your quality on? Now here's another photographer from that kind of time period, Ilford Eisenstat. So Ilford Eisenstat worked at Life magazine. Funny, I used to get Life magazine, I was a subscriber. And in the magazine, there was an ad for the new Life gallery. They were going to open up a gallery in New York to showcase the work of the great Life photographers. So for some reason, I don't remember what it was even, I contacted them to find out something about a show or email. I didn't email them, that didn't exist. I mailed them, somehow I contacted them, and I got on their mailing list. So the funny thing about that was I would get invited to the openings of these shows because I'm on the mailing list of the gallery, and that's what you do, you invite your Patreons. And in 1988, I worked at this small little newspaper outside of Toronto, and I got this invitation to Eisenstat's 90th birthday, 1988. He's turning 90, and I get an invitation to the birthday party because Life magazine at the gallery there is going to put on this party to, remember the great career that he's had with Life magazine. And I remember thinking, wow, New York City, I couldn't imagine going. That would be like going to the moon. There wasn't a chance I was going to be able to go to this thing in New York. And I look back at that now and I think, wow, it's just over in New York. You could just zip over. It could be a day trip, and you could go to this great party and meet these great photographers. He was going to be there. Anyways, one of the things I regret is not going to Eisenstat's 90th birthday party at the Life Gallery. Anyways, I have seen a number of Eisenstat's photos, and an interesting thing, I wouldn't use them as a measurement of what quality is. I don't think he ever spotted his pictures. Like, you would see these pictures of his in a gallery and you think, wow, did he spot them? Like, is that a hair on there? Like, for such a great photographer, and I love his work, and I'm not trying to really knock him here, but I don't think he spotted his pictures, which I find kind of weird for such a prestigious photographer. So Eisenstat did a lot of assignments for Life magazine, portraits of celebrities like Marilyn Monroe, his famous shot in Times Square, and this other one here in Venice, I really like. It's just got a great quality to it. I've never seen an original print of this one, but Eisenstat, again, interesting to kind of measure your work against his. The pictures are older, the film is older, the lenses are older, but you start to see a little bit better quality as we move through time with these photographers. Now here's a photographer worth considering when you think of high quality work and high quality prints. Eugene Smith. Again, he worked for Life magazine, but he did work for other places as well and shot for Time and things like that. But one of the things I've learned about him is he was a meticulous printer, and he would spend maybe a week, 10 days printing the same negative over and over just to refine it and make the perfect print. Now, as a photographer now or a freelancer, there's not a hope that you could spend 2 weeks printing the same negative. Like, that is just nuts to think that you would spend that length of time. But he was on staff at Life magazine, and there was no restriction on his time to make the perfect print. And his prints are magnificent. Now, some of his work are really collages more than single images. You wouldn't really get away with that now at a news gathering magazine to have a collage. This picture here, apparently the hand and the saw were added in the darkroom. They didn't really exist, but that was how he interpreted the scene, and that was the print that he made. Maybe that's why it took a week to print it. Just you had to, work through all of these other issues. Anyways, meticulous printer, and a great one to kind of measure your own work against. Shooting 35mm, what kind of quality could you get? If you can see some of his work at a gallery, I think you'll find the prints outstanding. Now let's jump to the kind of the modern age for a second. Now here's a couple of good looking guys, but I don't want you to look at myself and Salgado. I want you to look back at the print behind them. So this is, I think, for 35mm film, this is probably as good as it gets. So master printer, used Tri-X for the most part, shot on a Leica R camera, so premium lenses, great film, and a great printer. Now when you look at that print behind us, yes, there's grain. It's taken with the sharpest cameras, the sharpest lenses. I think he shot Tri-X for the most part. But this is probably the pinnacle of quality for 35mm. I mean, that's a huge print. Now that print, this was at the gallery in Toronto, and that print they were trying to sell for $200,000. So I mean, it just was the highest quality possible. So when you looked at his work, you thought, well, there's a milestone that you can kind of aim towards. There's a target. Great prints. Yes, there's grain because it's 35mm, but he used great optics, and he meticulously printed these prints. I'm not sure that he did them, but the darkroom person that did them did an amazing job. These would be what we would call photographic fiber-based paper. So it's not a digital file, it's not a digital print. These are fiber-based prints that are made in the darkroom. Now, for years I worked for Sony. I was one of the national managers for Sony North America, and we were launching a new camera in New York, and I was in New York for the launch. And while I was there, I reached out to the Richard Avedon Foundation, which is in New York City. It's not really open to the public, but I reached out to them, and there was a Canadian working there. I kind of called a favor and had a chance to go down and tour the place. So this is me with Richard Avedon's camera. Now, Avedon is one of the great fashion photographers of all time. He is the legend. As Cartier-Bresson is the legend, the father of photojournalism, probably Richard Avedon is the father of fashion. Funny thing with that, when I was in college, this would be probably like 82, Avedon had a big show in Toronto, and the college photographers were all invited to come down to the show. And you know what, man, he was some fashion photographer, like, why would you bother, right? So we didn't even bother to go down. So we had a chance to meet Richard Avedon because he was at the opening of his show. And then we ended up going to the show a couple of days later, long after he had gone. But I just thought, wow, we were such fools back then, you know, like Eisenstat, never went to the Eisenstat party. Richard Avedon was in town. It was like so much hassle to go to that. So never went. Wow, I sure do regret that. Anyways, back in New York. So I'm in New York, and I'm at the Richard Avedon Foundation and kind of having a tour, and you can see his negatives. They'll go into the vault, and you can pull out the negatives, and you know, you can see his camera. And his work is meticulous. Now, he was not, for the most part, shooting 35mm. He definitely had a Rollei, because they had it there. These are his Rolleis that he used. And he kind of evolved from the Rollei to 8x10. He probably always shot 8x10, but in his later work, it's just 8x10. Now, one of his most famous photos is this diva shot, done as an advertising shot, and shot on 8x10. So when I was there on the table, they had a print of this that was still like a heritage print from when Avedon was alive, and they were spotting it and sending it to the person in Europe who had purchased it. So it would have been maybe 6 feet wide, maybe 8 feet tall, and it was actually had a seam because the photographic paper wasn't that wide, so they had to kind of meld two widths together to get that. So the picture itself had a seam, which is interesting. I never really knew that happened. So while it's there on this table and the spotter's going to come in, I mentioned that I could spot it for them, like it wouldn't be a big deal. Anyways, they declined and decided to get the professional spotter that they've been using for decades to do it. So I guess that makes sense. But they sold this print, they said, for $500,000 to a European collector. So just if you get a chance to see Richard Avedon's work at a gallery, I think his work, especially the 8x10 work, is just meticulous. And if you get a chance to see his the American West, which are portraits of drifters, cowboys, people from the West, they're fantastic. You should really check it out. Some amazing images, but amazing image quality. Certainly has great image quality. So if you're talking about great image quality, you're going to have to consider Ansel Adams' work. Now, in the early 80s when I was still in college, we started to kind of study his work, and I started to understand a little bit about what he was doing and how his work was. He was still alive at the time. And he was a great photographer in the large format genre of photography. So I guess it looks like some of his work was certainly shot on 4x5, and some of his very famous shots were done with the Hasselblad, early adapter to the Hasselblad. He's mostly well known for shooting on 8x10, and a lot of his work again was 8x10. There's not as much of his work shot 35mm. So when you go to a gallery and you see Ansel Adams' work, you're going to recognize it as this is the high water for quality. I love his picture content as well, but I'm just talking about the quality. He has great quality pictures. Now the problem is for your work, my work, how do you bring that quality home, and how do you learn to recognize it? So if you look at pictures in a book, you buy some portfolio book of Ansel Adams, you'll see great photographs, but you won't really see the quality because they're reproduced, they're printed on the press. They're not photographic prints. You really don't see the glorious quality until you see a print, a photographic print. So when I did this, he was still alive, but you could still do this today, and it's online now. If you go to the Ansel Adams Yosemite Gallery, under print sales, you'll see an area of prints that are these masterpieces, and they're very expensive. However, there's a group of prints called special editions. So these special editions are printed, some are digitally, and some are printed photographically in a darkroom. And this was a series that he said, I'm going to keep these shots separate, and I'm going to make them available for less money so that my work can be appreciated at all levels. So years ago, when he was still alive, I bought a couple of these 8x10 prints. One was shot on 8x10 negative, and one was shot on Hasselblad. So they're kind of some of his famous work, and you can still buy those today. They're not printed by Ansel Adams. I don't think mine were printed by Ansel Adams. I'm sure they weren't. They had a high-end technician doing the printing. But these are prints done to his specifications from his original 8x10 negatives that you can own. Now, when I bought them, they were like $200, and I checked just the other day. They're for 8x10, they're $512. So yes, that's a lot of money, but it's not an unbelievable amount of money. And you can own an Ansel Adams print and hang it on your wall and look at it every day and say, that's what premium quality is. It just gives you a measuring stick to know, hey, how is my work comparing? How are my tones? How are my shadow details comparing to the great master. Now, it was a different time. You used different films that, were available then. They're not the same now. The lenses are better then. Our work should technically be better technically than his. But, you might just settle on the quality that Ansel Adams was able to get. Great work. When you go to a gallery, check out his work. Now, most galleries try to have an original or two. Maybe it's not on show right now, but a big gallery would have an original Ansel Adams in the back that maybe you could see. Or if you're in Rochester, you can kind of go and see the Kodak Museum there and, talk to the people. And maybe if they're not on display, there's some in the back that they'll pull out for you and let you see. Now this Ansel Adams print, this is one of his most famous photographs, Moonrise. And when I was again in college, we went to the Jane Corkin Gallery in Toronto, and she had an original on the wall for sale of the Moonrise. And it was $10,000 back then in the early 80s, and an astronomical amount for a photograph. But this is probably the most luminous, beautiful, most beautiful print that I've ever seen. So it's worth checking out. If there's a gallery in your area that's showing some Ansel Adams work, or you go to a major city and there's major galleries and you can, email ahead of time and find out, hey, what's on display, but what's in the back room, maybe I can, go in there and, study some prints. Some of the galleries are open to that. Anyways, Moonrise, amazing quality. It's a measuring stick of the highest quality. Now, as you study these great photographers, Ansel Adams, and there's so many other great ones, and you bring it back to your own work, I started to shoot 8x10 and 8x10 landscape. Now, was I like Ansel Adams? No, I'm never going to be famous like that. My pictures aren't as good. But looking at his work, mostly in galleries, it's like a compass, and it's just pointing you in the right direction. So yes, you're going to make mistakes. Yes, you're going to have to use today's films. Yes, you're going to learn things and have failures and some successes. But by studying the work, and particularly at galleries where it's darkroom printed, not printed in a book off of a printing press, by seeing the work of these masters, you can just use it as a compass for your own direction, keep you on track so that you can have the highest quality as well. Now this particular shot, this was done in Zion Park in Utah. I remember driving down the road and kind of seeing the scene, and I only had one frame left on my 8x10, so I've only got one frame of this. Usually you would shoot more than one, you would work the scene a little bit. Anyways, I shot this on 8x10 and I have printed it with an 8x10 larger. And then I thought, well, I just wonder maybe it would be interesting to do it digitally. And so I had this 8x10 negative, and I thought, I'm going to get a high quality drum scan done. So I took it to a commercial place where I could get a drum scan done, and it was $500 to get the drum scan done, 500 Canadian dollars, and it's a 500 meg file. So now you have this file, 500 meg file, but you still have to go into Photoshop and, interpret it and burn and dodge and make the print that you want. However, when I took the file back home and I started to work on it, I thought, you know what, I actually don't like to do it on the computer. It's a great file, it's got tons of detail, but I like to print in the darkroom. So I never actually photoshopped and finished the file off, and I've never printed it. But I learned an important lesson. What I learned is I like to work in the darkroom more than on a computer. I want to make fiber-based darkroom prints. I don't want to print off of a printer. That was just a lesson that I learned. So where does all this bring us to? You can go back into the early days of photography, and all of us can exceed the quality that they were able to exceed then, because we have better films and we have better lenses and better papers, things like that. So you can look at those early photographers and you can kind of get some direction, and you can look at the modern photographers. I just think of Salgado. For 35 mil, I think he has the pinnacle of quality. So try to see some of his works in a gallery if you can. And if you pursue this quality, then maybe you're going to end up shooting 8x10. And you can see great works by the master photographers, Ansel Adams and the whole group of the great landscape photographers. Amazing quality. And you can kind of use that as a compass to measure how your quality is improving. Again, we have probably better lenses and better film if you're shooting on that large format. Now, as we're talking about quality, there's something you always have to remember. Now, this is the great photographer Robert Capa. He has a couple of very famous images that are horrific quality. I don't think you could get quality that bad if you tried. Like, look, there's sprocket holes on the bottom of the frame. The film wasn't loaded properly. And then it's well recorded how it was ruined in processing and they overheated the negatives and the negatives melted or whatever. There's different stories. You kind of can do your own research on Robert Capa and his, what happened to his famous negatives from D-Day. However, you have to admit they are horrific quality. And you compare those to the modern quality that you can get, there's no comparison. You every day can get better quality than this, but you know what you can't do? You can't beat that content. So in the end, you use the quality like a compass to point you in the right direction, but it's always about content. And any gallery in the world would rather hang these photos than my work, which is of superior quality on 8x10 negative. They're nice pictures, but any gallery would rather hang these photos because of the content. So content is always king. Pursue the quality, but stand in front of more exciting things. Just saying.